to the Festival
of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement, getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, and Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, depending. Most of you, I hope, remember to set your clocks. My name's Scott Rahn. I'm the author of the book of It, which you can see me over my shoulder behind me. This is my fourth and last appearance. I have to say I'm going to miss some of you. I really not sure where to begin, so I opened my book up and I have a spot in a conversation that had already begun. He said, "What is the purpose of God's own hand in all of it?" I asked him in defense of my own religion's teachings. "Don't you understand yet?" he asked me, mildly surprised by my statement. "Is the object of your own quest, the quest of all watchmen, the ability of humanity to freely do as it may, and then learn to choose based upon what it has wrought and done, is God's own hand in it. Free will, the freedom to do as we please, that is creation's own gift of God to all of conscious physical existence," he said, as though lecturing a small child. "If what you say is true, then why is it that the great darkness that is out there is steadily grown stronger as humanity's own knowledge has increased instead of fading away into nothing?" I asked, as I still sought to defend what I myself thought. I still thought that good and evil were both there to be unavoidable black and white opposites that were to be studied and watched, and that we watchmen had been kept in existence by God as some sort of defending force, always set to fight for that which we knew to be for the good and godly. The darkness has nothing to do with good or evil. It is the manufacture of people who have decided and then freely done, either without concern for the consequences or in order to steer consequences in future events, so that their consequences, the direct results of these one's own actions, are profitable or beneficial to their own self, their own personal power position, or their own future generations' gains and preservation alone, without concern for the effects of their actions upon any and all that does or will one day surround them in creation, he said in the tone that took on the tone of a teacher who's trying to get a stubborn child to learn. More of the darkness out there is the result of unconcerned selfishness on the part of some individual acting in favor of their own personal motives, somewhat across the experience of human existence, than there is darkness that is the result of anything else. His scolding tone was now becoming an even more evident part of his speech. That is kind of the answer to a commonly asked question over the last 3 messages or times I've been on. Oh, thank you, Helen. The cover, yes, it's simplicity, and I hope it does tickle curious minds. That's kind of the object of it. It's kind of a portrait of, well, actually is a portrait of things that were stacked on my bookshelves here in the library. And I had to move them to a different location, and put them on a desk. But the sword and the lamp and, well, the dragon skull, the treasure chest, all of it, they're all contained within the book. The pile of things on the shelf, of course, was accident, but it made sense as the book cover when I looked at it and saw it. And of course, there's books, there's maps. You'll see a clock. You'll see, actually, somewhere buried in that, a small glass globe. It in itself, if it's looked at, it's pretty complex, simple still life. But yeah, the cover itself overall is very simple, because I didn't want some kind of glaring and deceiving artwork to make people think that the book was something it wasn't, or that it itself was something it wasn't. And that's how I depict it, because it's weirdly complicated yet weirdly simple. It's a set of short stories. The stories themselves have an interconnecting line. That interconnecting at the point that I read to led to that point. But each story on its own is its own. It's kind of the way things were written thousands of years ago. Okay, thank you, Jay. Yeah, well, the book of it is mysterious even to me, to be honest with you. It's what I call a thread through the tapestry of time that is always there. It doesn't, there's a commonality everywhere in the world that kind of defies explanation and naming, let alone knowing when and where it originated. And it got nicknamed it when I was researching and coming across it again and again, and unable to name it, I just called it. And I like the idea that you are made curious by the title, because that was kind of what I was hoping between the title and the cover picture, that people would not only be curious enough to read it, but they would be curious enough by nature to check out and try to disprove and prove what I've written, because, well, you'll find there's quite a bit of facts backing up what I've written, but at the same time, you never know what you're going to run across that, excuse me a second, may not be a part of it. You never know what I define as smoke and mirrors or outright lies are going to come to kind of bury away what it is or where it is, or the fact that it exists always, and that there's no getting away from it. It's always there. It's part of our existence. It's in its own way, the consequence of having free will, the ability to do what we want. And then from there, the intelligence to choose. No, I have not written any other books, Jay. I have a manuscript that actually came before the book of it. It's kind of a text, but I see it as, because it's a text, it's kind of boring in several ways, like a textbook gets to be. And I had looked for a different format, and the format of the book of it was what satisfied what I wanted, and hopefully what a reader would want. And that text, whether or not that gets published, remains to be seen. I mean, it would mean an interest developing in the book of it, and people wanting to see it, which at this time it hasn't sold a lot of copies, but being a best-selling author was not a goal. It was more sharing what I learned and what I saw, or certainly believe I saw, that while I still had the chance, was more the motivation than being a rich and independent author ever was. But there's a lot in the book of it that is hard to describe any other way than the way I did it. People talking to people, something that can be done basically on a small stage in front of a crowd of people. That's the way it was done when people were illiterate and couldn't read. People went around and presented shows, lessons, dialogues, so that they would hold the watcher's interest or the student's interest in a classroom. And there's a lot of metaphors in it. You'll find twists. You'll find, be curious, it's full of riddles that are there to be worked out. And some of them were composed by me, and giving a person a chance to figure things out for themselves. And some of them are riddles I encountered and had to work out, or am still trying to work out. As I said, I believe yesterday, it's the research that went into this still doesn't bore me. I still come back to it from time to time, and I still actually learn things I didn't know at the time I wrote the book of it, which technically was 20 years ago. Dorothy, no, not really. I know this sounds strange, but no, when I originally wrote it, the chapter, The Gargoyle, I didn't care for very much and really thought about leaving it out. And as time passed, and when I read it again, then 20 years later, I really liked that chapter. I liked what it had to say and where it fit in the book. So I'd be afraid if I rewrote and changed things, it might not come out for the better. I mean, there are things that probably need to be added to that I now believe that I didn't know then. But other than that, no, a rewrite I'm not really there for, because, well, even the things I learned since, some of them, most of them, like I found out, are kind of up to a curious reader to find out. And that's really where that goes. I mean, there is no definitive ending or beginning. We're kind of a spot in time, or a note on a musical scale, if you want to go back to Ptolemy from Greece, or Pythagoras rather. Pythagoras, the same one that came up with the Pythagorean theory in geometry, who thought that everything was like a musical scale, musical notation. And in order to have harmony, you have to play the right notes. And if you don't play the right notes, you get a discord, chaos, just noise. And that theory has always kind of stuck with me, because Pythagoras had a point. There's consequences and echoes to everything. Everything makes its own sound in creation. And if you strike a note here on, say, a piece of sheet music, well, then that interrelates to notes that you will strike later on to compose a melody. And it's an interesting analogy. Hopefully that works for you. Pythagoras also, apparently, according to the remake of the series Cosmos, actually designed an instrument that was built and sits in a museum to actually play a composition like that. It's a pretty complex looking instrument. I don't know if anybody could learn to play it, but it's interesting to look at, if nothing else. But people all through time have come up with concepts like that. And I said, in Pythagoras's existence, I guess you'd say, his form of immortality, in today's world, much more has to do with plain geometry than his philosophical thoughts and the things he contemplated, which is actually just as fascinating if you ever get a chance to read a book on him and his Pythagorean philosophy. Plato was also a philosopher, along as a historian and author. Socrates, Aristotle, Democritus, a strange Greek who, well, among things that carry on from his thoughts is our word atom for atomic structure. He reasoned that you could keep cutting smaller and smaller. Given a chance, Jay, what other story would I write and what genre? That's kind of hard to pin down. I mean, I have in my head kind of an outline of a guy just like 4 or 5 years older than me, and what he grew up in. The stories here from the older people. He comes from a small town somewhere, and how the world has changed, or did change actually, across the 20th century, and points of view and views on war, views on education. Like most people watching me right now don't know that the concept of high school only dates back to like 1925. 1950s was the first year there was actual teenagers like you see them today. Our entire social structure changed because of different things. 5-day, 40-hour work week, which was developed by Henry Ford, who, by the way, did not develop the assembly line, which is another thing that's taught. Remington already had one. And the earliest that I can find dates back to the Renaissance in Venice, where the people of power there went up and hired Norwegian workers, come down, build warships for them. It took them about 9 days to build an entire warship on their assembly lines. they used to take people and show it to them just to show how powerful they were, how quickly they could build and equip a navy if they needed to. The thing that Henry Ford did do, however, he fine-tuned the idea of an assembly line to the point where one person did exactly one task, and he was able to put out over 1 million Model Ts, create the 40-hour work week, pay more than almost twice what the going rate was for anybody else in manufacturing at the time. But that's, kind of what, if you're a far thinker thinking of the whole and the future of the whole, you come up with ideas like that. Where, in fact, when he went to build the car, the automobile itself was a patent owned by a consortium, and you had to go through them in order to get permission to even produce an automobile. Well, they turned him down. So he went back, talked to his lawyer, he told his lawyers that, you better be ready because we're going to be in for it. I'm going to make my car anyway because I don't believe you can hold the patent for the automobile. And I believe the court was in Chicago, and to everyone's surprise, Henry Ford won the case. You can't own the patent to the automobile in general. That just doesn't make sense. And the Model T came to exist because of it. And so did Chevrolet, Chrysler, any number of, but they would be the bigger ones today still. The entire, but like I said, thinking not only for yourself, but for what you're going to produce. Kind of sense this book of yours is a fantasy you'd love to do or something close. JM, no, it's not really a fantasy. It's me orally or in print relating in a way people can understand a journey I've already taken. I mean, yes, a lot of the scenarios, etc., are obviously made up, but that was the case 300 BC when the Greeks were doing it. There's no physical Tower of the Watchman. There's no, that's more to point out that even though there might not be very many, there are still going to be other people that believe as you believe. And it's, like I said, nowhere near being a fantasy. It's more history than fantasy. It's more of a chronicle of things I've seen and experienced in a rather unique and adventurous life that I really don't go into very often because, well, at this point in my life, they're just old stories. And the people I shared them with are, well, mostly passed away. So there's nobody, it's not like a shared story anymore. It's just stories told to amuse and entertain. Hopefully that answers your question, JM. I know sometimes when I speak, I get to be a bit of a rambler because I know what I'm saying and or going to say and what I want to get across. And there's so many things floating around in my mind that come out. It makes it somewhat confusing sometimes to other people. But in your case, in the case of anybody else that was wondering, no, it's not a fantasy. It's not something I'd love to do. It's the story of a journey I've already taken. And actually a story of where I had gotten to be at the time I wrote the manuscripts. And now I'm at another point in my life and in another spot. We'll see where that goes. the part of being a writer, or having free time to go and do as I please. A lot of things in the book is more about things I've noticed, things I've saw, things I've thought about and contemplated and researched, experiences I've had, people I've met and associated with that most of you will never ever meet people like them in your whole life. In fact, a lot of you will pay admission money in a movie theater to go see movies about fictional portrayals of people like them. But the book of it is definitely history and philosophy, much more than it is fantasy. And I hope that is actually a point, because I've also been asked, what led me to write a science fiction thriller, or what led me to write a science fiction book in general, and it's not really any of that. It's not, regardless of what I read at the beginning of my appearance, a religious text either, or a political text, although it certainly delves into what are people's religious and political points of view, or politics and the way it works. But they're more the words of an outside observer than they are any kind of treaty or Jay seemed to like the top of the office, loves writing mysteries or thriller books. You just give off that kind of energy. Have you tried writing other genres? Jay, I always have, but I always get stumped. Mysteries, thriller books, etc. They have kind of a basic outline plot, and you get to a certain point writing, and it's like, yeah, I don't like that anymore, or I don't like this. I've not written a mystery beyond this, the book of it, that's mysterious enough to me. Thrillers, most of the same thing. They're not thrilling, not scary. Stephen King, for instance, has wrote in the genre of horror a huge number of books, and I have 4 or 5 I really like. Most of them, not so much. I do love his short stories, and I'm not being critical of Stephen King. That's just my personal take. My curiosity makes me want to wander off, learn more, see more, and you can't always do that. When you're dealing with a genre of book that has, like I said, a definite outline to how it's to be composed. Even adventure stories, the best adventure stories end with the protagonist finding some great fortune, or some great revelation, or gaining fame. It's, they're just defined in too strict of a way to make them interesting for me to write. And hopefully that's the answer to your question. The fact is, I'm actually kind of a reluctant writer this time. A friend of mine read the actual original manuscript and kind of pushed me towards having it published because he really liked it. In my case, it was, at that time, a handwritten manuscript that was sitting in notebook form, and he wanted to read it, see what it was like. In his case, the first time he read it, He never finished it, which may happen with a lot of people that pick up and start to read the book of it, because he had the impression that it was getting to be a bit too religious. And I had to explain to him more than once, no, it's not a religious book. It's just religion can't help but play a part in it any more than history can, or any more than, well, disbelief of certain things presented as historical facts. They're just not, they don't fit the definition. I like to tell you, it's the little things in a culture that make a person ask questions. One of my favorites to pick on is woven cloth, because that started out as some kind of fiber or animal hair. And somebody found that by twisting them together, you could make string, long string, then yarn. And then I'm assuming it went from there to either basic weaving, like kids make pot holders and stuff out of at camp, or something like crocheting. But even then, to have any color to it, you have to come up with what dyes what color. Like this expensive purple in ancient Rome was from snail mucus. How many things do you try before you try snail mucus? Then, of course, you have the loom. Although the loom for weaving exists in several different time periods and several different cultures around the world, it had to have taken from that time, that string, each step took until somebody thought, well, what if I do this? And that could be centuries in between each step. There's no way of knowing. Yet when we began supposedly in Samaria, not only whoever built Samaria have a huge amount of knowledge in civil engineering, but they also already had woven cloth, and different colors had different significations and meanings. The cities already had working, they had working sewer systems, water systems. They were laid out where there were market areas, residential areas. Like I said, they were not the work of beginners. I mean, there is the possibility they were built on ruins that were already there, but then you have a whole nother question. Who built the ruins? And eventually, so it comes to a point where you get the idea that the accepted period for the development of civilization had to be much longer than we believe. Even the mathematics required in constructing an arrow to make it balanced, make it fly straight so you can aim it, make it fly, period. The flights, the feathers on the back, for those unfamiliar with archery, they have to be positioned just so. That entire process, although would be hard to develop without mathematics, according to accepted history, it appeared at the same time period all over the world. It doesn't make sense. Okay, Helen, the civilization that built the pyramids was different. Okay. I believe that technology was entirely different from ours. It may not have been overall more advanced than ours, but somewhere there are splits where you can learn things like, okay, the civilization that built the pyramids had to be the same civilization that built other buildings of megalithic blocks all over the world, or there were several different countries that shared this technology, whatever it was. The idea of moving blocks of that kind of tonnage in any of those locations is, you can't do it with log rollers. You can't do it with, slaves tugging them. They weigh tons to hundreds of tons. That there's no. So yeah, they they may have been more technologically advanced. The Hopi Indians, for instance, claim that ours is not only not the most advanced, it's not the first. And well, they claim 6 different creations with 6 different civilizations. And that's also a long story to sit and listen to, by the way. But yeah, we're not this first civilization. We can't be. And as far as the most advanced, in the case of being able to levitate, because that basically one way or another is the only way they could have moved those blocks without leaving rust that would still be there. One of the things that I discovered in my wandering around North America is where the Oregon Trail went and the Santa Fe Trail. So many wagons passed over the same spots, so you could still see the wagon rust. They're going to survive beyond this civilization and puzzle people. And a strange side there are spots on the Oregon Trail where so many animals passed. I had left animal droppings that the grass was still greener on the trail itself than the grass on both sides. It's that much more fertile. There's so many different odd things that occur during any kind of movement or migration or civilization. There was an archaeologist. He grew up, in his words, in the shadow of the pyramids in Giza and knew a lot of the legends. And he was also Cambridge University educated. And he claimed that it was held pretty much universally by the people that he grew up around, that there was a highly sound related technology. They could heal with sound. They could move these blocks with sound, which present day experiments are kind of bearing out. There's labs that are being able to levitate small things in little booths, nothing like something that weighs 100 tons. It'd be like being able to lift a locomotive, which is very difficult for us to fathom. But as far as being advanced all the way around, okay, we'll assume, for instance, the Mayans actually built their pyramids, the Mayan calendar, etc. They were hugely advanced in that area, yet they still believed in human sacrifice. So I would say their social advancement kind of strange by our point of view. And hopefully, Helen, that was part of at least an answer to your question about if I believe they're more advanced or not. I just believe that every civilization and every technology is different. And some ways more advanced, some ways perhaps less advanced. Ours has huge potential. It just lays mostly unrealized, even in its present form. And it becomes more and more part of a social or political goal than actually a monetary goal. Let's be honest, that's the initial, I guess you'd say, initial desire of any advancement in technology. Thomas Edison once said he didn't want to invent anything he couldn't sell, or something to that effect. There's not that much for the benefit of mankind type developments, or to help mankind, or to add comfort to mankind's existence, not his house, not creature comforts, but make his life more comfortable, his sufferings, eliminate his sufferings. When you look at it from the point of view, 8 million people a year die of starvation. We can cure that because we throw away food in the Western world all the time. Or, we have so much food, we don't even care about throwing it away. This just, we don't share it because there's no money in it. And that's a darker side of our civilization. We don't have, and those of you who are watching, you say, wow, 8 million people die of starvation every year, but like me, you don't do a lot. The critical factor in determining progressiveness of a society. Brian, this is going to be difficult. Critical factor in determining progressiveness in a society is most probably a factor that deals more with tolerance, compassion, and caring, and making them an integrated part of that society's self-discipline than anything else. I mean, you can't force people to have a change of heart. Their heart has to change. You can pass all the laws you want, and you can try and pass laws to say, well, you have to accept this group. You have to do this. You have to do that. I mean, yes, you can get away from, for instance, Jim Crow laws, but that doesn't mean you're going to get away from the racism that came with it. We're learning that lesson the hard way 50 years on. It's still there. Whether I believe it or not, no, I do not. But you judge a person by who they are, not what they are, which I believe is something Dr. King used to say over and over again. Okay, I am getting a message. Says I can wrap up. I am working on the concepts. Like I said, the questions you're asking today, they're good concepts. They're dealt with in the book of it. The idea that, yes, there are others. The idea that there are ways in which advanced civilizations can easily collapse, and that includes ours. There is a possibility, I don't completely agree with, of the conspiracy theories that there's a group of people who want to take over the world, because I don't see the gain in it, because those people already have to have more money than they know what to do with. And, well, if they're steering events, more power than they can ever have if they're in charge. But, and I go into, the idea that the more advanced the civilization, the more susceptible it becomes to primitive attack. One of the things that's come about since is, of course, everything being virtual, including me right now, versus print. Because when we're gone, it will leave behind no trace. That's why there's no history before the Akkadian times. And but anyway, it's time for me to say goodbye. I never realized it was getting this late. Sorry, folks at Reader's Magnet. I didn't realize I had run this far. Um, but anyway, it's been fun. I've enjoyed every interaction with all of you. And I hope to see you again sometime. And thanks a lot. Goodbye.